have some good news and some bad news for you guys. Luckily, it's one piece of bad news and two pieces of good news to set it off. Are you guys ready for this? The one piece of bad news is that this is the last video I am putting out in the year of 2022 on this channel.
No, that's impossible.
I will be returning in 2023 at the start of January with some big deep dives and some new videos and some big book reviews and things like that. However, I wanted to take a little bit of a break to spend some time with family and friends and just enjoy holiday stuff because, as you guys might know, I love the holiday season. I love Christmas time. I love all the Christmas music and the decorations. I am really into that stuff.
It's just nice to meet another human who shares my affinity for elf culture.
So I wanted to take a couple weeks off just to do some rest for that. So this will be the last video going out on this channel for this calendar year, and then I will see you guys in January. However, two pieces of good news. Remember, first one, you're not going to have to miss me that much because I recently launched another channel, which I will link in the description below. That is a movie review channel that I made with my best friend, RK Gold. He's the co-host I have on my already second live stream channel, Your Morning Guru, and we were like, we need to make a movie reviews channel because we're always trying to review movies together.
All right, excellent.
Excellent.
So we're going to be reviewing some movies on there, so you won't have to miss me too long because you can subscribe to that channel and get a ton more content over there. Second piece of good news is that we're going out with a bang.
I said bang, 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 bang.
In this review today, I am ending the year on a book review of a book that I am very excited to review today. A book I've been very excited to read ever since I even heard that this book was coming out in the first place. And I believe this will be one of my first ever poetry reviews on this channel because poetry is not my thing as much as fiction is, and even fiction is not my thing as much as nonfiction is. You guys know how much nonfiction is kind of the staple of this channel.
Non-fiction flapjacks.
But I also love fiction, as that is the majority of what I write. But poetry's always kind of been the category that's gotten a little left out along the way. However, today we are fixing that, as we will be reviewing this book right here, Reflections on Healing by Rachel Oates, her first ever poetry collection, which has just been released. I'm so excited to review this today. Let's do it.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago.
You guys asked for it.
What's up, my fellow small business supporters? I'm Savvy, and welcome back to Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business, where today we've just got a book review. This is all pure book reviews, literature, that kind of stuff. It's gonna be wonderful. But if you're new here, before we get into it, please don't forget to take a minute and subscribe, because multiple times a week I put out new videos all about books and business, reviewing books, talking about the writing process, talking about words and writing and being an English teacher, all of those kind of things we talk about on this channel, as well as the business side, being a small business owner, what it's like to look at the book publishing side of the book world and things like that, as well as critiques of unethical business practices. So we've got a lot of stuff that we cover here, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, go ahead, take a minute to subscribe. I'll wait real quick. Hold on. I'm gonna wait. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare, which is an online learning platform featuring thousands of classes where you can develop new skills, discover new hobbies and passions, and explore your own creativity. As many of you probably know, last month was NaNoWriMo, or National Novel Writing Month, the challenge where writers attempt to write a full draft of a novel in 30 days. If you saw my vlogs on that process, you know that I participated in this challenge, and as a result, I've had a lot more videos on my channel lately about my own writing process. With that has come comments from you guys wanting to learn more about creative writing and various authors' processes, and Skillshare is a place where you can do just that. Skillshare includes lots of creative classes around writing, including creative writing courses, writing for self-discovery, and more. I've also enjoyed taking classes on Skillshare about the marketing angle of book publishing, including one taught by a friend of mine, Jenna Moresi, which I took a few years ago and absolutely loved. But I don't use Skillshare just for professional development. It also has classes for other hobbies and skills as well. For example, I love taking classes to help me with my spelling and pronunciation while I've been learning to speak Polish during the past year. And I also love adding classes to my library for art, fashion design, and other hobbies that I want to learn about just for the joy of the exploration of a new creative realm. So if you're interested in trying Skillshare, head to the link in my description below, where the first 1,000 people to use the link will get a 3-month free trial of Skillshare. Skillshare is ad-free, with new classes launching every week, and also includes subtitles for classes in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. So go ahead and click on that link in my description below and try out Skillshare for yourself. I hope you all enjoy learning something new. Now, back to the video. Awesome! I hope you did it! Additionally, I would like to give a shout out to all of my Patreon supporters. Patreon supporters who give $5 a month and up are listed in the description below, where they have the option to link their own small business or social media page or things like that. And I really appreciate everyone on this channel who is a part of my Patreon. Names are up on the screen. Thank you guys so much. I greatly appreciate that. And with all of that in mind, we are going to head into our review today of Reflections on Healing by Rachel Oates. I was so excited when I first learned that Rachel Oates was releasing a poetry book. So if you guys don't know, Rachel Oates is another YouTuber. Her channel's actually very similar to mine. So if you like the stuff I cover on my channel, you're gonna like the stuff she covers on her channel, because she also does a lot of book reviews, a lot of literary analysis where she really breaks down what's going on in the book. And then she also has covered, you know, the anti-multi-level marketing movement. She also covers feminist and LGBTQ topics and things like that. I really like her work. And I actually first got to know her a little over a year ago now, when she did a review of Gabby Hanna's poetry book. She gave it a negative review. However, I thought her review was really good, because even though she had a lot of criticisms of the book, she was always comparing it to other poetry she read. She was always giving constructive criticism on how it could be made better. She was always breaking down what worked and what didn't work and why those things did and didn't work. And I thought those videos were excellent. So when Gabby Hanna decided to start harassing her about the negative review, I made a video about that topic in Rachel's defense, saying no, she has every right to make these criticisms. And from there, Rachel actually reached out to me, and I got to know her over the past year, and she's so incredibly nice. And so when I heard she was going to finally be releasing a poetry book of her own, I was super excited, just because I know how passionate she is about poetry, how passionate she is about art and everything like that. I mean, she's a multimedia artist, which I really like, because she wrote the poems in this book, but she also painted the cover art herself. And what I think is really interesting is that towards the end of the book, she even has a little information about, like, she has other examples of paintings, and then she also has information about, like, how she painted the cover. Yeah, she has a page called Cover Art right here. She shows her, like, art process in the back and talks about it. I just thought that was really interesting, how she combines so many different art media together. Because this isn't only a collection of poetry, it is also a collection of photography. And I will be honest, I am not a photography expert whatsoever. I am interested in film and movie reviewing and photography from the elements of, like, cinematography and how that plays into a film and a narrative, but I've never been super well versed in the technical elements of photography. However, I actually would highly recommend this video that Rachel herself put out recently, where she's reviewing the poetry of Brooklyn Beckham, who is, I guess, a nepotism celebrity. And he put out a photography book, and she had a lot of criticisms of the photography, and she was really criticizing it kind of from a technical level, where she was talking about what was technically wrong with the photos, or what about the photos worked and didn't work. And I learned a ton about photography from that video, so highly recommend it. And I was keeping some of those things she talked about in mind when looking at examples of her photography in this book as well. So I wanted to go through and show you guys a few examples of poems in this book that I thought had a lot to talk about and a lot to unpack, and then we will just talk about some takeaways from this. Going into it, I'm going to say that I'm going to give this book 4.5 stars, which is a very high rating. I overall really loved it. I thought there was some really, really clever stuff in here, and I thought there were some poems that really hit hard emotionally. There were some places that I had just, like, some things where I'm like, well, maybe this part could have had a little more of a consistent rhyme scheme or something like that. But then again, I'm not the poetry police. I'm just here to share my opinions. But overall, this is a 4.5 star read. I'm going to round it up to 5 when I put my review on Amazon and Goodreads for this. And I do highly recommend this book to everyone. So going into it, you guys know this is going to be a positive review, okay? The only thing I would say when it comes to recommending this book is that I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you're in a place emotionally where reading about some of these themes is going to put you in a really negative emotional state, because there is a lot of really heavy stuff in here, which we will be talking about. So I'm just going to warn warn you guys in advance, this video and this book itself does deal with themes related to trauma, related to abuse, specifically abusive relationships and things like that. And I think that they're dealt with in these poems in extremely well-crafted ways from a literary perspective, but also I can see how if you're in a position right now in your life where reading about that could be hurtful to you, it might not be something that you want to pick up right now. It might be something to put on the shelf for later, for when you're in an emotional space to be able to read that kind of thing. So that's the one caveat I'll give about this book. Here is the summary of it. Reflections on Healing is the first collection of poetry and photography from Rachel Oates, who is best known for her YouTube channel often featuring feminist-focused poetry and book analysis. Her poems depict her journey toward healing from trauma on both an analytical and emotional level as she tries to make sense of her experiences with difficult families, abusive relationships, mental health struggles, and taking back control of her own body. And she does also include a warning on the back which says, "Please be aware this book discusses healing from domestic violence, abuse, and self-harm." And I'm glad she gave that warning because these poems are very heavy, but they're also they hit really hard emotionally. So let's take a look at a couple of them. So the first one in this book, I think this actually is the first poem overall in this book. This poem from the beginning, I took a lot of notes, as you guys can see on this poem. I took a lot of notes on it. And I also took some notes where I thought she did a good job at pairing the photography she chose to go with the poem that she chose. So this photo, for example, I loved. I was kind of thinking about, like when she did that video reviewing Brooklyn Beckham's poetry, she was talking a lot about when you look at a photo, where does your eye want to go? What journey is it taking you on visually? And so I kind of thought about that when I looked at this photo and about the direction that this woman's hair is flowing upwards. You see that your eye kind of goes in that direction, but then I thought there was an interesting like parallel in this photo between the texture of her hair going up and then the texture of the skirt flowing down, because it kind of created almost an interesting level of symmetry. I just thought there was a lot of visual interest in this one photo. So shout out to Rachel on this photo right here. So in the first stanza of this poem, Childhood, it starts off saying, "Another plate thrown mid-meal. Congealed gravy crawls down cigarette-stained walls, wood chip cracked and yellowing, soaking into threadbare carpet, past its prime before her birth." So a few things I really liked about this. First of all, it starts off with very strong imagery, and that's one thing that I will note throughout this book that I think Rachel did really well with, was a lot of really strong visual and sensory imagery in her poems. So we have the congealed gravy, we have the personification where she talks about how it's crawling down the wall, so we can kind of see the movement and she's almost giving agency to the object itself through the personification there. Excellent use of literary devices, figurative language, all of that. But I also thought that a lot of these poems had an interesting internal rhyme to them, even when the poems didn't have a consistent rhyme scheme at the end of the line, because, you know, that's not how every poem's gonna sound. I'm a sucker for rhymes, but I know that not every poem rhymes at the end of the line because that's not like a universal rule for poetry, right? But even when she didn't have a poem with a consistent rhyme scheme at the end of each line, we still had some interesting internal rhyme through the vowel sounds of different words that you could match up together. So I would have fun, like in my notes, trying to match up together where certain vowel sounds were. So for example, in this stanza, "Another plate thrown mid-meal, congealed gravy crawls down cigarette-stained walls." There were multiple internal rhymes in there. First of all, we have the word meal and then congealed, the eel, E-A-L sound comes again 2 syllables later in that. And I thought that that created an interesting rhythm to it. And from the start, I felt there was a rhythm in this poem. And then we had the crawls and walls. And so from the beginning, we've got this 2 rhymes within these first couple lines of the poem, even though this isn't a poem with like an A-B rhyme scheme or anything particular like that. I thought this poem had a lot of good consonants and alliteration used throughout it as well, where she had "Mum cries in the kitchen, head hangs over the stained steel sink." So we have head hangs and then stained steel sink. We've got that repeated S sound, and even the first 2 words, the repeated ST sound, which it's just, it's auditorially satisfying, I guess. And then the third stanza starts with, "And downstairs, alone in the family room, a child scrambles on hands and knees, picking up individual peas." So once again, we've got that internal rhyme. And then I also just really liked the set of words "alone in the family room," because it's like alone in the family. And it's like there's a family, but she is alone. And it showed how the family was separated. This is supposed to be the family room. This is supposed to be the room where all of them are together, but each person's in a separate room. And each stanza depicts a person in a separate room. And I thought that that was a good line to really bring out that visual. This poem was structured in a really good way, I thought, as well, because each stanza kind of shifted the perspective, where we had the first stanza is almost from the perspective of like the house itself, where we got the plate being thrown, we've got the food, the walls, we're talking about the house itself being past its prime. We see the house kind of decaying in its own way, and the house is aging. So the house is the perspective of the first stanza, the second stanza showing the parents' perspectives of them being separate, and then the third stanza being the perspective of the child. So there's a point of view shift kind of in each stanza, but I like that the first one focused on the house itself. So we moved almost inwards, like we have an outward stanza at the beginning. This poetry is just like photography, guys. It's like, where does it draws your eye somewhere. So just like this photo right here, it has like a really dark center, and then it moves upwards into a point, and then it moves downwards into a lighter flowing direction here. That's kind of how this poem felt as well, in a parallel type of way, where it's like the first stanza is from the house's perspective, so we're in like a wide shot. It's like an establishing shot. We've got it from the outside, but we do see the details of what's going on in the house, but it's from the perspective of the thing that is containing everyone. Second stanza is from the parents' perspectives, so we've got the two parents, and that's like moving in a little bit, and then the third one just focuses in and zooms in on the child and is only from her perspective. Anyway, I thought it was a really interesting poem in how it was structured, and I quite liked that. There were a few places where I wanted to see a little more of the internal rhyme that went throughout it, but I want to be clear about something. When I talk about rhymes, I am just like really a sucker for rhymes. I love when things rhyme so much, to the point that it annoys other people, because people will be like, Savvy, this poem or this song, it intentionally didn't rhyme because it sounded better that way. And I'm like, if you say so, I think everything should rhyme all of the time. But I know that that's not necessarily true. But there were a few places where I thought, a little more internal rhyme here could be good. Like, for example, in the second stanza, we've got Mom cries in the kitchen, head hangs over stained steel sink, Dad shuts himself upstairs, the blaring radio makes his silent scream louder. I liked how we had the upstairs and the blaring radio. We had the AAR, like the air sound in both of those. I would have loved to have seen some internal rhyme in the first two lines of that stanza, but I know that it was hit really hard with a lot of the alliteration in there. So I know she probably didn't want to overload it with like too many literary devices at once, but that was just my opinion. The poem in this, one of the first poems that I think really took me on another emotional journey, was this poem called Puppet Master, which starts on page 22. And guys, this poem is intense, okay? So this poem is told about someone going to a puppet show. You go to a puppet show, and the puppet master is this incredibly charismatic guy. He's someone who makes you feel special when you see him, and when he talks to you, you're starstruck, and you're like, wow, he's so talented, he's so cool. And then he, along the way, is like, you know what, I think you're special too. I really feel connected to you. And he makes you feel like you're the most important person in the world. And as I'm reading the story, I'm like, oh no, is this going to be like a metaphor for an abusive relationship, and the person that he's talking to is going to have to become the puppet? And you guys, that's exactly what happened, and it's scary. So I think that this poem overall, I think it did a good job having an extended metaphor throughout the entire poem that was completely consistent the entire time through, never faltered from the extended metaphor. And this is one reason that, if you guys remember when I was reviewing Dave Hollis's book Built Through Courage, and I talked about how the ship metaphor didn't really work. He was like the boats and the ships. Those metaphors didn't work to keep an extended metaphor going throughout 200 pages of a self-help book. And I was saying he should have made it a poem, because if you have a poem, you can often keep an extended metaphor going throughout one poem, and you can make it so that it doesn't get old, and that it has time to breathe, but without overloading the audience with it. And that's what I really felt here that she did a good job with, which was that she had this extended metaphor about the puppet show, and a puppet master being the symbolism for an abuser in a relationship, because of the way that you feel when you're in a relationship being abused. You feel like you're being controlled as if you're a puppet. And I thought that she had a really strong use of that metaphor throughout this poem, because it didn't get to the point where it felt old. We went through the whole story in this poem, and then at the end there was a resolution. So I would say that this poem is a good one to look to if you want to look at how to use extended metaphor in a way that is satisfying to the reader without annoying them. That's what I would say. This one does have like an A, B, B type of rhyme scheme, if that makes sense. It has a rhyme scheme where at the end of every single line rhymes. I guess that's couplets. It's told in rhyming couplets. That's the term. So it is told in rhyming couplets, and I think that there's an interesting perspective that goes throughout this poem. It starts off, "Ladies and gentlemen, and all you good folk, come one, come all, to see this fine show. Behind the big top where the acrobats swing, clowns take a tumble, and the divas all sing." And it starts from this like announcer perspective, and then it goes into the details of the puppet show, with the second stanza starting with, "It starts with a doll alone on the stage with breathtaking beauty on her painted face. You can't see the strings as she dances around. As the music swells, she won't make a sound. But you marvel at her beauty and grace, her elegant dress of satin and lace. She seems to move with freedom and joy. You soon forget she's merely a toy." I really liked the imagery in this stanza. I thought it was really good at talking about the way her dress looks, the expression painted on her face, how the beauty was painted onto her in the first place, and that type of thing. You get a sign from the beginning that she's being manipulated in some way, but we still see this person as an object, as a puppet, not as a human. The one thing about this stanza that confused me a little bit was the verb tense. I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be in the future tense, because there were parts where it would say, "As the music swells, she won't make a sound," and things like that. That makes me think like, okay, this is still the announcer saying, here's what you're going to see at the show, but then there would be parts where it says, "You soon forget she's merely a toy," and it makes me think, are we in the moment right now instead? So that was one thing that I was a little confused on. I was like, should it be, "You'll soon forget she's merely a toy"? I wasn't sure. Again, I'm not a poetry expert in any way, shape, or form, but I was a little confused just in this particular stanza about the timeline of where things were. Like, are we still announcing the show and the show's about to start, or are we in the moment in the show right now? But either way, I think that this stanza still had a lot of good going for it. I think there were some really strong descriptions of gesture in here. One example being at the start of the third stanza, it says, "After the show, a puppet master appears. He glows with delight as he drinks in the cheers." The idea of him drinking in the cheers, because later in the poem, it's going to talk about the puppet master guy drinking a lot of alcohol. So you can tell he's like getting high or getting some type of buzz off of the attention from the crowd, and then that later turns into him seeking out vices that give him a similar buzz in a much more destructive type of way. So I thought that line, "He drinks in the cheers," it showed some really strong foreshadowing and also created a really vibrant visual within that line. So lots of praise for that. Okay, the fifth stanza I think I loved the fifth stanza, especially the first 4 lines of it, because it started with so much internal rhyme and so much alliteration and consonants. I think that there was just the way she wove in these literary devices really made it like satisfying to the ear, I guess. Let's just listen to this real quick, okay? "Potion slips from his lips and enters your blood, and all you can feel is joy, peace, and love. He tells you tall tales, faux feminist fables of history and art and romance with no labels." So first of all, we've got the rhymes at the end of each line, those vowel rhyming sounds, and then the tall tales, faux feminist fables, and then the fables rhyming with labels. And then it also, even within the line, it had "Potion slips from his lips." There's the slips and then his lips. We had an internal rhyme and then an internal repeated consonant sound. I just thought that was a very satisfying couple of lines to listen to. So what I think is interesting about poetry is looking at things on the micro level, because poetry is often a lot shorter than a whole novel or a whole piece of prose, where a lot of stuff on the micro level is really just in service of the macro level. But in poetry, a lot of times what you do it feels like detail work, right? Like writing a novel feels like you're painting a house, whereas writing a poem feels like you're painting one of those Warhammer figurines. You got to use a really tiny brush and get really in there with the details. I hope that made sense. But that's how poetry feels to me a lot of the time. So it's fun to look at those things just on the word level and the sound level, because that's where poetry really can start to shine. And I think Rachel did a great job in a lot of these lines here with that. So at the end of the 5th stanza, I made this note where I was like, oh no, is she gonna become the puppet? And then the 6th stanza starts, "Hollow promises fall from his wine-stained lips, and you believe it all because you want to be his. He promises to give you the whole wide world. You'll be the star of his show, his only girl, but only if you agree to become his next puppet. He'd treat you so well if you just sit down and shut it." Dude, I was like, oh no, I called it. And then the visual imagery as she has to become the puppet is legitimately terrifying. In the first stanza on page 24 at the top of the next page, I literally wrote, "Johnny the Walrus could never." You guys remember Matt Walsh's book, Johnny the Walrus, that I reviewed, where he tried to terrify children with like horrifying visual imagery just for the sake of like trying to make them not trans? What a terrible person. Anyway, in this book, Rachel uses horrifying visual imagery as a way to show how an abuser can take control of a victim, and I think she did a great job with it. Just, I'm warning you guys, I even wrote I have chills as a thing on this page. Here's what it says. The circus around you fades far away. He ushers you smoothly to the back of his stage. Inside is a workshop filled with wood, paint, and saws. Dust coat all benches, equipment, and floors. You forget all your plans for candy and cake. Hot dogs and burgers will just have to wait. The usual scents of the fair start to fade, and behind a thick curtain you find a large cage. It gets really intense from here. But I also think that just the structure of this poem and then some of the wording of it gets really strong as it goes on. You shrink away from his touch and cover your ears. So I was like, there's the sound in touch and then in cover, and that was good use of that assonance within that line. But he screams that though she's been with him for years, it's you who is special, and without you he's lost. And you see with a flick of his wrist, she is tossed. Then we've got the flick and the wrist, we've got the soft I sound in both of those words right next to each other. Onto a pile of rejects and losers, marionettes he swears he no longer uses. I also loved the marionette and then swears. Just those two words, they don't really rhyme. One of them is a lot more syllables than the other, but the assonance in there was really strong. So I liked that. Anyway, that kind of continues throughout the poem. I think that overall this poem was really emotionally intense. It really does hit hard and depict how an abusive relationship could feel from the victim's perspective. The ending stanza, I kind of wish that at the end it went back to that outward perspective, because if you guys remember, the first stanza was, "Ladies and gentlemen, all you good folk, come one, come all to see this fine show," and it started with like this announcer almost introducing you to the puppet master. I would have loved to have seen that more as like a framing device so that we could come back out to that perspective away from the inward focus on this girl who had become the puppet. Although, I mean, that's an artistic choice and it's valid either way. That was just my opinion. But I did also think that either way, the ending line was really powerful in this poem, which was, so this is the last stanza, "And without one last glance, you run from the circus, leave that old fool with no friends or purpose, and while you alone will live life to the fullest, remember, what is a puppeteer without any puppets?" I thought that was still a powerful ending line because of the way it resolved the story. So either way, good job. I just thought that this right here was a good juxtaposition. If we're on page 37, there's a good juxtaposition of the photograph with the poem. I like the order she chose to put them in because she has a picture of herself against the mirror, and then the next poem right next to it is called A Reflection on Healing. And remember, the book is called Reflections on Healing. So I like that we had like a literal reflection next to a figurative reflection. And then I'm going to point out some places in future poems in the book where that reflections theme comes out really clearly as well. There was another poem on page 35 that really fucked with my head in terms of just how, we're just gonna read it, okay? It's called Amethyst. "He made me think the purple blush around my wrist was no more than a bracelet of amethyst. I should be lucky to wear, to cherish, to treasure, not a bruise blooming where he tried to tether me down and control my movement and will, leaving invisible scars to this day still." And I was like, I just wrote, wow. I thought the rhymes in this were strong because it wasn't like a perfect rhyme scheme, but it was consistently imperfect, if that makes sense. It was consistently imperfect in a way that that almost gave it an additional rhythmic quality, because a rhyme scheme doesn't have to be perfect, but if it's consistently imperfect, then at least you pick up on the pattern. In my opinion, poetry is all about patterns, and I think that a lot of people would agree with that. So I think that this poem had a clear pattern to it, and I think that the visual imagery was really strong on this. The purple blush around my wrist was a bracelet of amethyst. This idea of like someone trying to tell you that the pain they're giving you is a gift because they're hurting you out of love, and that's kind of the takeaway I had from that, which is it's a really sad poem, but I think it was also very clever the way she wrote it. My favorite poem in this entire book is on page 40. It's called Repeating Cycles. Just how cleverly it's written. It starts up at the top with the phrase, "the man," and then it's almost like, I don't know, like a choose your own adventure story. It kind of reminded me of. It had like a choose your own adventure story where each line she expands into there being more options of what the next line can be. So it has the man, and then it's either with the charming smile or with the kind eyes. And then the third line has 3 options: held, broke, or earned. And then the fourth line has my hand and my heart and my trust and my respect and. So each line adds another thing so that you can pair them together. So you can read it, if you go just all the way down the far left, you can read it as the man with the charming smile held my hand and promised to keep me safe. But if you just move one of those and choose a different one. You can have the man with the charming smile held my hand and threatened to never let go. So you could change it to he promised to never let go. So based on how you put the words together in each line, it changes the meaning. And then if you read it across, you can see how that evolves a story of someone promising to love you and be there for you. And then you see that the way they express that love, it turns into possessiveness. So if we like read down the side, it's like, okay, the man with the charming smile held my hand and promised to keep me safe. The man with the charming smile held my hand and promised to never let go. The man with the charming smile held my hand and threatened to never let go. So once you change one thing like that, it's suddenly like, okay, now he threatened to never let go. Now you suddenly start to feel trapped in it. And the more you change one line on each thing, you can watch the relationship over time turn into something extremely toxic. But then by the time you finish and you get all the way to the side on the far right, you see it start to evolve back into something that could appear loving once again. So if you're reading down the right, the man with the kind eyes earned my respect and struggled to maintain an illusion. So there's that one. Okay, now we're still in the toxic relationship. The man with the kind eyes earned my respect and committed to maintain an illusion. So, okay, now we're seeing he's promising that he's going to at least try to make it appear like they're in love. Okay, well, maybe everything's going to be okay. Maybe we can make this work. The man with the kind eyes earned my respect and committed to build a life together. Now he's promising her something big and something committed once again. And that repeats the cycle, which would take us back to all of the things, then we can go through the whole cycle once again. So this was just such a clever structure for a poem. I absolutely love this poem. I think it's brilliant in every way. I don't know. No, zero criticisms. One of my favorite poems I've ever read of all time. Amazing work, Rachel. The other poem that I absolutely love, that I believe the back of the book says that Rachel performed this poem at the Glastonbury Festival of Contemporary Performing Arts. So that sounds like something very British. So she performed it there, and I'm glad that she did, because it took me a minute to figure out what this poem was about, but once I did, I was like, oh my god, I love this so much. This poem is called Room, but it's spelled R-O-M-B. And at first I wasn't sure what she meant by that. I was like, is it supposed to be like tomb? Like a room that you die in or something? Which could be one interpretation, but then when you parallel it along with what the meaning is that comes out of it, that makes it even more like dark, I guess. Anyway, I think this poem has so many layers and it's so brilliant the way it's written. Anyway, it's also supposed to be like womb, like the inside of your uterus. So let's just take a look in this. There's a room in my house that everyone has an opinion about. Some days I'll be sitting at home when a gaggle of people barge in uninvited to inspect the room. They warn me it's no use sitting empty. Think of the potential. Be more grateful. Some people aren't lucky enough to have a room like this. I'm sorry for them, of course, but why do they get to decide what I do with my room in my house? And so this is a poem about choosing not to have children, which I'm someone also who has chosen not to have children. So this poem really resonated with me in a lot of ways, because a lot of times people will tell you, you know, why aren't you having children? Why you have this ability to have children? Other people wish that they could have that ability. But, you know, it's like, well, this isn't your body, this isn't your house, that's not your choice, unfortunately. Like, I'm sorry that you don't get to have a room in your house like this, but it's still my own room that I can choose to do what I want with. And I think what was interesting about this parallel to the house is that it brought out this comparison where you can see how if someone were literally talking about a house, if someone literally came up to you and they were like, why don't you put anything in this storage room in your house? Or like, why aren't you doing, like, people wouldn't ask you that for the most part. I never hear people really giving critiques about the way that people manage the space in their house. Yet they are giving critiques on people's bodies. So it makes me wonder, like, is this also kind of commenting on the way that we seem to sometimes value property more than we value humans' bodies and more than we value humans' lives? Because it would seem so ridiculous to comment that way about someone using their house in that way, but we're totally fine to comment on people using their bodies in that way, when I think objectively we can all agree our bodies are more important than our houses, because human life is the most important thing of all. Or maybe it's not, I don't know. Anyway, let's continue. Daily I'm interrogated from every angle. How many people have passed through here? How long did they stay? And then squinting at me with hushed voices, did they leave or did you evict them? Then they look at me like I'm a monster, a landlord from hell, to a room that's always been vacant. This just won't do, they chastise. And who wants an old used room anyway? I like how that points out the hypocrisy of people are like, you need to use this room for something. Why aren't you renting out this room? Why aren't you letting people live in this room? Yeah, well, who wants your stupid room anyway? Right after they tried to like force you to move into the room, then they're like, yeah, no one would even want this room anyway. It's like once you've rejected someone from having children with them, they're just like, yeah, no one's gonna want you anyway. It's like, yeah, that's the whole point. I'm glad you think nobody wants to live in this room because I don't want anyone living in it. Oh, so I thought the pointing out the hypocrisy there was really great. And I think the landlord from Hell line was important too, because once again, it's drawing that comparison to like, we're so critical of the way people manage their own bodies, and we're not that critical about their property or about renting out property in the same way. It's a very weird cultural double standard. So it was one of my favorite poems in this book as well. I highly recommend it. Overall, I definitely recommend Reflections on Healing by Rachel Oates. I'm going to be posting my reviews of this on Amazon and Goodreads as well. It is available to get on Amazon Prime, I believe, so you can get free shipping if you have Amazon Prime and all that. I got it in 2 days. It came very quickly, but I definitely recommend this book. If you have someone in your life who really likes poetry, it could be a great gift for them, as long as you know it's for someone who could be in a mental place where hearing those type of poems wouldn't put them into negative of a headspace. But for someone who knows that this is something that they feel up to reading at this time, the poems are very good, and a lot of them were really interesting to read and to come back to, and to find again some interesting things in the way that she used certain words or certain literary devices, and then to also look at them in terms of like what meaning she was trying to bring out, how she conveyed that with certain imagery. I just feel like something new hits every time I read one of these poems. So definitely check out Reflections on Healing, and if you haven't already watched Rachel's channel, it's where I've learned a lot about poetry myself, because some of the poetry reviews she does on that channel are just absolutely excellent. So highly recommended. I appreciate all you guys watching this video and spending the last video of 2022 on this channel with me. Make sure to subscribe to my other two channels, Your Morning Guru, which is linked in the description below, and my movie review channel is also linked in the description below. So make sure to check out both of those channels as well if you want to see some more of me before the end of 2022. But otherwise, I hope you guys are having a fantastic holiday season right now, and please, in all of your holiday shopping, keep on supporting small businesses. Have a great start to your day. Bye, everyone!
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago.
You guys asked for it.